I will go ahead and start welcoming folks to our presentation for today on results from the National Crime Victims Survey on stalking around the nation. And this will become important to us as we move through the day, because stalking is one of those activities that is both related to violence against women and others, and also to grooming people for human trafficking victimization. So really happy today that we could join forces with the Violence Against Women cluster here at UCF and our Center for the Study of Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery. And briefly, the center here is a few years old, but we're kind of in constant reshuffling. But we do try to encourage on campus faculty and students who are interested in studying issues related to human trafficking of all kinds, and also presenting to our community information such as this that touches the broad areas of human trafficking from international to local. And also then providing other forms of service to the community as we can. I will note we are the only Board of Governors recognized Center for Human Trafficking in the state, though we do have partners at other universities who do similar work, and we do that work also. I want to welcome some of the folks from the sexual violence centers around the state who are working with us on our rape prevention education efforts. So with that, Libby, you're gonna, I am Roberto Q. Potter, and I will introduce Dr. Libby Mustaine from over in sociology to talk a little bit about the Violence Against Women's cluster.
Hi, everyone. It is delightful to be here. I'm so excited to see everyone. And no offense to the rest of you, but I'm particularly excited to see Drs. Truman and Morgan. It has been so long since you were in the hallowed halls of sociology, and it's so exciting to see you all here and see successful graduates and all that. So very exciting. So the Violence Against Women cluster is a faculty-led initiative here at UCF. And as we all know, women experience, millions of women experience violence in their lifetimes. And stalking is just sort of another way that women experience this violence. The physical, emotional costs are high, the economic costs are high. And the cluster, in order to understand the complexity of violence against women and to help create innovative responses that transcend any one discipline, the cluster has faculty from numerous departments and colleges on campus. Specifically, these departments are social work, criminal justice, sociology, population health studies. And it's really an exciting interdisciplinary effort. And I think it also helps us to better position ourselves for using our social justice perspectives to make an impact on this problem. So we are really excited to have this webinar today. And I will turn it back to Dr. Potter.
Thank you. And I will second what Dr. Mustaine said. It is really nice to have Drs. Morgan and Truman with us. And I got to play a small role in their educational process here. So, it really is great. And they're working my favorite federal agencies that I got to work with staff over the years when I was at CDC, and then since then on some of the prison health issues and other things. So I'm really excited to welcome you two back to campus in a manner of speaking. And I'm going to turn it over to you all to do the presentation. And I think if people will type questions that they have throughout the presentation into the chat, we'll do our best to get those things answered for you toward the end. So Jenna, Rachel.
Thank you, Libby and Hugh, for introducing us. We're very excited to be back. Jenna started at BJS in 2010, and I started in 2013, and we've been working together ever since on a lot of great projects. And we're really excited to share the results of a stalking victimization survey that was conducted in 2019 with you. So let me get my slides up. We will get started. All right. So this is stalking victimization results from a national survey of victims. And just a quick overview of the presentation. I'm going to quickly discuss the Bureau of Justice statistics, and some of you may not be familiar. And then talk through the National Crime Victimization Survey, or the NCVS, and its supplemental surveys, and then dive deeper into the stalking supplement methodology and how we have defined stalking at BJS with this data collection. And then turn it over to Jenna to talk about findings from a recent BJS statistical report that was released in February. So BJS is the US's primary source of data on criminal justice statistics. It is a statistical agency within the US Department of Justice and is in one of 13 principal statistical agencies in the US government. And a lot of agencies in the US government collect data and report out on statistics. However, the principal statistical agencies really have this as their primary mission. So they're focused on the collection, compilation, processing, and analysis of information for statistical purposes only. So the mission of BJS is to collect, analyze, publish, and disseminate information on crime, criminal offenders, victims of crime, and the operation of the justice system at all levels of the government. And BJS was first established in December 1979 under the Justice Systems Improvement Act of 1979. So now the NCVS, or the National Crime Victimization Survey. So it's currently sponsored and directed by BJS. The first full year of data collection was in 1973, and it was called the National Crime Survey. And then in 1992, it was redesigned and renamed the National Crime Victimization Survey. It's one of two of the nation's major sources of information on criminal victimization, along with the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting Program, or UCR program. And the NCVS was actually developed to complement the UCR program and collect information on crimes that are not reported to police. So the major goals of the NCVS are to measure crimes not reported to police, provide an independent calibration for the UCR program, provide an indicator of crime outside of indicators generated by the police, provide a measure of victim risk, and serve as an index of changes in police reporting in the US population. So how are the data collected? The NCVS is administered by interviewers that work for the US Census Bureau to persons ages 12 or older in a nationally representative sample of households in the United States. And it's a panel design survey, so 7 interviews are administered over a course of 3.5 years, 1 interview every 6 months. And for example, it's address-based, so if your family leaves your address, we would still come back to that address and interview the next family that moved into that household. The first interview is done in person, and then subsequent interviews are conducted either in person or on the phone. And it's a self-report survey, so persons are asked about the criminal victimizations they've experienced during the prior 6 months. And it's incident-based, so we collect information about each victimization incident that someone has reported. So what data are collected in the NCVS? We collect data on non-fatal violent crimes, so rape and sexual assault, robbery, aggravated assault, and simple assault. We're clearly interviewing people, so we can't collect data on murder. We leave that up to the FBI. And then personal larceny, so purse snatching and pocket picking, property crime, so this includes burglary and trespassing, motor vehicle theft, and other types of household theft. And the NCVS data provide information on characteristics of victims and crimes for the population, and then for subgroups within the population. So for example, race and Hispanic origin, sex, age of victim, educational attainment, marital status, etc. And the NCVS is the main source of national data on topics including reporting to police, hate crimes, intimate partner violence, crimes against persons with disabilities, injury, non-fatal firearm violence, and the cost of crime. And there's more information on the BJS website. So in addition to the core NCVS, what we call the core NCVS, what I was just talking about, we also administer short topical surveys or supplements at the end of the NCVS interview to eligible respondents. So they're typically in the field for 6 months, so either from January to June of a given year or July to December of a given year. And these supplemental surveys allow BJS to capture the changing landscape of crime or new or emerging types of crimes that may come up without interfering with the core survey. So the current supplements include the identity theft supplement, the police public contact survey, the school crime supplement, which is in the field right now, the supplemental fraud survey, and then the supplemental victimization survey, or we call it the stalking supplement. So to date, there have been 3 administrations of the stalking supplement or supplemental victimization survey, 2006, 2016, and 2019. And we purposely left the term stalking out of the supplement name, so supplemental victimization survey, in order to minimize respondent bias. So there are many definitions of stalking, and some people may not know what the term stalking means, so we decided just to leave it out of the name of the survey. The SVS was administered to NCVS eligible respondents. So this is persons that completed an NCVS core interview, ages 18 or older in the 2006 administration. And then in the 2016 and 2019 administrations, we administered it to persons ages 16 or older, because there was not a data collection that was collecting national level data on stalking for persons ages 16 or 17. Oops, wrong way. So the instrument was completely redesigned for the 2016 administration. We redesigned it to include updates from the Violence Against Women Acts that were passed in 2005 and 13, specifically elements of presence, so stalking that occurred within US waters or US territories, elements of intimidation, emotional distress, and cyber stalking were some of the updates in those VAWA reauthorizations. And then the 2019 instrument was largely the same as 2016, but there were a few minor modifications based on the 2016 administration and some feedback we received from interviewers. So some examples of those include, we tweaked some wording to questions that may not, when you read them out loud, maybe they weren't working completely. And then also added some explicit don't know response options, because respondents could legitimately not know, for example, if an offender monitored their social media activities. So it's not that it's an invalid, response option, but it is a valid response option. So the 2016 and 2019 data are comparable. However, the 2006 data are not, because it is a completely different instrument than the newer versions. So in our stalking definition, we decided upon 5 components or elements. The first being unwanted contacts or behaviors. So we categorize these into traditional behaviors, things like being followed or watched, and then also cyber-related behaviors like having your social media activities monitored. The second component is a repeated course of conduct. So experiencing the same behavior or contact more than one time, or experiencing 2 or more different behaviors one time. And then the third would be an actual fear component. So fear for your safety or the safety of someone you know, experiencing some substantial emotional distress. And then finally, the fifth component is reasonable fear. And this is fear that a reasonable person would be fearful because of a threat of harm or actual harm to them or someone close to them. So maybe the offender had attacked them at some point, or attacked a pet, or someone close to them. So they're reasonably fearful that that could happen to them as well. So in order to be classified as a stalking victim in the SVS, a respondent had to experience the unwanted contacts or behaviors multiple times, so repeated, and then 1 or more of the actual fear, substantial emotional distress, or reasonable fear components. And this is the definition that we settled upon. So a repeated course of conduct that either caused the person substantial emotional distress or to fear for their safety or the safety of someone else, or that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or the safety of someone they know. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jenna to talk about our recent report findings.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everyone again for being here and for inviting us. We're really excited to be here, and it's great to see some friendly faces. So just keeping that in mind as well again. Next slide, Rachel, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about findings from our recent report using the 2019 SVS data. And the first thing that we looked at in this report, we kind of broke out, and Rachel talked about this just a little bit, 3 types of stalking. So we looked at those that experience traditional only, stalking with technology only, and then those that experience both types of stalking. So in 2019, we found that about 1.3% or 3.4 million persons aged 16 or older had experienced stalking within the last year. And since we were able to compare the 2 instruments, we did look at the difference between the 2 years. And so the percentage of persons that had experienced stalking had declined from 1.5% in 2016 to 1.3% in 2019. Next slide. So we also looked at the difference of the stalking behaviors. So in terms of the traditional stalking, what we're calling traditional stalking in the report, these included things following watching, showing up at places, harassing friends or family for info, waiting at places, sneaking, leaving items. So kind of all of those different behaviors we asked about and whether or not they had experienced them. And in 2019, the most frequently reported traditional stalking behavior was that included the offender following and watching the victim. So that about 58% of victims had experienced that. They also would experience a significant amount of those offenders who had showed up or like ridden by or driven by places where the offender had no business being. Next slide. We also looked at the types of stalking with technology behaviors. And so these we included here phone calls or text messages, unwanted emails. We also included here monitoring social media accounts or using the internet to monitor the person, posting information online, spying using technology, or tracking with electronic devices. So we asked about all of these behaviors that you see in this table and whether or not they had experienced them. And about 2/3 of victims of stalking with technology received unwanted phone calls, voice messages, or text messages in 2019. And then about 22% had said that the offender spied on them or monitored them using some form of technology. Next slide. So the one kind of important piece, and Rachel mentioned this about the NCBS, is that we're both measuring crimes that are reported and not reported to police. So we can look at this for each year, and we found in 2019 that about 1/3 or 29% of all stalking victims had reported the victimization to police. And just to kind of give some context, when you look at the NCVS and look at all violent victimization, it's about 41% that were reported to police in 2019. So as you can see, stalking victims report a lower percentage than overall violent crime, at least in 2019. And victims who experience both types of stalking, so those that were experiencing both traditional behaviors as well as stalking with technology behaviors, did report to police more often than victims who experience stalking with technology only. And then again, this was another place where we were able to look at the findings by year and compare kind of the trends for the two data collection periods. And we did find that reporting to police had declined, in particular among traditional stalking victims. So it went from 39% to 30%, but reporting to police increased for those that had experienced technology behaviors. So that went from 16% to 23%. And next slide. So looking at demographic characteristics of stalking victims, and this, and we have later in our slides, we have a link to the report. This is from table 4 in that report. So looking at that in 2019, we find females were stalked more often, or more than twice often, as males. So their prevalence rate was about 1.8%. Compared to 0.8% for all males. And again, this is all males or females 16 or older. And then looking at by age, we found that persons ages 20 to 24 were stalked more often than persons 35 or older. And then looking by race and ethnicity, comparing to white persons, so their rate was 1.3%. The stalking prevalence was higher for those persons of 2 or more races and persons who are American Indian or Alaska Native. And then looking by income, we found that persons living in households earning less than $25,000 annually were stalked more often than persons living in households earning more than that, so earning $25,000 or more annually. So those in lower income households were experiencing more stalking than those in higher income households. Next slide. So we also are able to look at stalking by a victim-offender relationship, and as probably to no surprise to everyone here, most stalking victims knew their stalker. So about 67% of those that experienced stalking had known their offender. The victims were more likely to be stalked by, in particular, a well-known or casual acquaintance. So you see that 38%, or a current or ex-intimate partner. So that's 25% compared to those of an other relative, so about 5%. And we do, so you can see here that when we ask about the victim-offender relationship, we do kind of get some additional details about known and unknown offenders, as well as intimate partners. We ask about current or ex. And then, in the well-known casual acquaintance, asking about whether it was a friend or, a relative of a, spouse, or, an acquaintance from a professional setting. In terms of looking at kind of the types of stalking, those that experienced both types of stalking in 2019 were 3 times as likely to be stalked by an intimate partner, so that 35.5% we have highlighted on the right side, as victims of traditional only stalking, so 11% there, and then 2 times as likely as those that experience stalking with technology only. So it appears that those that are experiencing both or those that are experiencing stalking by an intimate partner are being stalked in both manners, using all different types of traditional and stalking with technology behaviors. And then in 2019, kind of that highlight at the bottom there, in terms of unknown offenders, about 18% were stalked by a stranger and 14% were unable to identify the relationship to the offender. So the unknown here in the NCVS either means that they didn't know like they didn't know who the offender was, or they may not have known the kind of number of offenders, because we do ask also if there were, one or multiple offenders. And as we had kind of mentioned earlier too, that it's possible if they were only experiencing something online, they may legitimately not know who's doing it, just knowing that they're experiencing it. So there is this percentage as well that either, they just don't know. Next slide. So in the SBS, we also ask about a variety of actions that respondents took to protect themselves from the offender. These things include, changing their activities, blocking messages, particular self-defense or security measures, changing their information, and applying for a restraining or no contact order. And we found that in 2019, about 24% of all stalking victims had changed their day-to-day activities to protect themselves or to try and stop the unwanted contact of behaviors. And then victims of both stalking types in particular were more than twice as likely to have applied for a restraining, protection, or no contact order as victims of traditional or stalking with technology only. So I think, again, this is part of why we looked at this with those that are experiencing both types of behaviors, both traditional and stalking with technology. It seems to be a more extreme form. They're taking more protective actions. They're experiencing by different types of offenders. So that's one of the reasons we have kind of looked at this throughout the report. Next slide. The other thing that we were really excited to add in both the 2016 and 2019 SBS was their victims' use of victim services. So we have kind of a section of questions that ask whether or not victims sought services, and if they had, what they had received, if they had used those services. And just for context, for our purposes, we are using victim service providers. When we say that, we are meaning public or private organizations that provide assistance to crime victims. So when we asked about this, we found that about 1 in 6 stalking victims have sought victim services. And again, similar to other findings, victims of both stalking types were more likely to have sought services than victims of traditional or technology stalking only. And then looking at, of those victims who actually sought those services, about 74% had received them. So it's possible that they may have sought those services and not received them for one reason or another. So of those, 74% did receive them. And then for those who received services, about 60% had obtained counseling or therapy. And next slide. So we just, and I think you might have put this in the chat possibly. So our additional findings, this is not everything. There are more things in the report. We didn't want to go through every piece of it, but we wanted to highlight what we thought was important and of value to this group. So additional findings, we have the link there. For our report. And then also when we release reports, we also release our public use files. So the data are also available for folks to analyze. And we're always more than happy to answer questions if someone, had questions about the data analysis or, how to code the data. Rachel and I are always more happy to answer those questions. So with that, I will pause here, and for questions, we again thank you so much for your time and for inviting us here. We were excited to be here, so thanks again, and we're here for any questions.
Looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and ask them. One of them is, for the cases where the victim did not know the offender, was it recorded where the victim found, where the offender found the victim, like through dating apps or social media?
No, we didn't. It's not really designed to ask that way. So we're asking if they had ever experienced those behaviors. And then if they had, then we kind of get into information about, if they knew the offender. But yeah, we don't, if they didn't know the offender, we don't really exactly know or ask those questions about how they may have found them.
Thank you. We have another question, but I encourage any of you to unmute and just ask away. But if you'd rather put it in the chat, I'm happy to ask them. Another question we have is there a way to examine links between stalking and homicide?
I don't know how we would do that. Yeah, because I mean, these are, de-identified files. So I'm not sure how we could connect them with like the SHR data or something like that. Jenna, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, not really. We're not, I mean, because we're talking to victims, so we're not able to measure homicide. And if something like, let's say it escalated to the point where someone was killed, there wouldn't still be a way to identify that person, because all of our files are de-identified for data disclosure reasons. So in terms of linking directly, no. Yeah.
This is Lynn. Yeah, that was my question. And
Thank you.
I have tried since the late 1980s, when Jim Lynch was in there, to get homicide as one of the questions, because if you ask me, did you have was your bicycle stolen? And I'd say yes, and so on, but you're not going to ask me if my son was killed. It seems like it is overlooking a very important question. And if it was in there, we could start to look at things like stalking's effect on eventual homicides. So anyway, I'm still pushing it.
Okay. I mean, our reasonable fear measure asks about being attacked in other ways. And if someone close to you is attacked, but we don't get into, the specifics of that attack, or if that person was killed or something like that. But I mean, those are things to think about for the future, for sure.
And yet we ask about rape and domestic violence and so on, but we don't ask. It just, I still don't quite understand why we won't ask that, because it seems like an important type of victimization. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
So we have another question. We also, though, have a question sort of for the whole community here today. And so you all could be thinking about this as we are continuing to ask questions. But Dr. Potter has asked, can any of our service providers comment on how the data here relate to your experiences in the community? So we would love to hear from anyone about that. Another question we have is, was it recorded what the victims were reaching out to victim service providers for? Were they mostly looking for counseling, protection, legal aid?
Yes, we did ask a lot of details. And I can put the links in the chat, like to the actual questionnaire, if that's helpful. Let me find it real quick. We asked a lot of detailed VSP questions, because the NCVS typically does not ask a lot of detailed questions, and we really wanted to understand what kinds of services folks were asking for. So specifically, crisis hotline counseling or therapy, assistance getting a restraining order, legal or court services, federal or state victim compensation, short-term or emergency financial assistance, and then shelter services, safety planning. So we ask a lot of details, and I think the table or figure in the report has more details too, Jenna, right? So I can
yeah. We just had the figure in the PowerPoint, but the table in the report also has the details for those that sought services and received them. There's a table about the percentages there that had received certain services.
That's great.
So
So
I've,
I don't,
oh, Livia.
no, you go ahead, Bethany.
So thanks so much for the presentation. I know I have a copy of the slides, so I'm kind of looking at some of the things, but I think it's really interesting about the percent reported to police based on whether it was with technology or without technology. And I'm wondering if you maybe could talk more. I think it's just interesting as we think about how police are trained or how technology is really hard to understand, or even survivors might not understand that they're being stalked with technology. And I don't know if you're thinking about any future implications or working with some of your partner agencies on addressing kind of that particular area of police training, or how to kind of enhance understanding of stalking with technology.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, I think we added those questions because I think it's one of the, kind of priorities and understanding that technology. And I think we haven't, I think it's one thing to kind of dig a little bit into to understand, someone doesn't know, they know they're experiencing someone, but they don't necessarily know who's doing it. That might be part of what, one of the reasons, or they don't think it's serious enough to report to the police. So I think that's part of what we're seeing. And I think throughout the report, you see that those that are experiencing both types kind of have those more severe, whether it's reactions, whether it's reporting, or whether it's, applying for further restraining orders. It seems like that kind of it increases with those that are experiencing more and more behaviors. So I think, yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, we haven't necessarily, in terms of like partnering with other agencies, we haven't kind of reached out, but I mean, we do generally kind of get requests in terms of like how to address kind of like this technology or the cyber stalking, if you will. And we do also have another, well, knowing that was a question, we do also have like a separate table in the report looking at the cyber stalking that kind of takes out the phone and text messages. So concentrating more on that like technology stalking. So we have that information in there as well. Yeah, I don't know, Rachel, if you have anything else to add.
No, just a shout out to Bethany because she was on our technical review panel and helped us develop this survey instrument. Comes full circle.
I'm anxiously waiting for the 2019 data to be archived so I can look at both of them.
Well, let me ask with regard to that then. When you look at those people who take out the unknowns, but said stranger as a victimizer, did you, and just off the top of your head, I don't know how much you've gotten to play with this, but did you see any real differences between the types of victimizations that they were likely to experience relative to those people who did know their stalkers? Is there anything that stood out there?
We didn't look into that, but that is something interesting to think about. Yeah, and if they're committing different kinds of unwanted context behaviors, are they doing more traditional or is it more online? No, that would be something to look at for the future, or a good research question for
I was going to say a
students.
sociology master's student.
Yeah.
Great,
Yep. We're happy to answer questions, so just let us know if they come up.
So I've been hearing more and more about data brokers, and who basically, for those of you who are not as familiar, they are companies that that get data on people and then they sell it to other people. And so, it can encompass anything from like your, GPS coordinates, what you bought at Amazon, all that kind of stuff where, let's say you log into Amazon, you buy a sweater, and then, the next day in your ads is a sweater, and that sort of thing. So I've been hearing more and more about data brokers and just the amount of information that they have access to, and how sort of easily it is to pare it down and identify the actual individuals that, you know, when you can buy data, you can actually identify some of the individuals. I wondered if you had gotten into that or broached that at all when you were thinking about the technological ways of stalking. It seems like this would be, apparently it's really easy to get this kind of data. You just have to pay for it. And then, of course, you have access to your victim. I didn't know if you know, if you were able to sort of look into that kind of thing at all.
Yeah, not particularly that kind of thing. It sounds like maybe we both watched Last Week Tonight over the weekend.
How embarrassing.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think though, to your point, Libby, like you bring up a good point, is that so originally when this stalking supplement was designed, it was 2006. Tons of change between 2006 and 2016. And so that's why in 2016, we made kind of like huge changes. One of those being trying to get at those technology, the cyber stalking piece. And then we kept it the same in 2019, but even from 2019 to now, things like the data brokers have continued to kind of, you know, evolve as we go along. So it is one of the difficult things that we run into with the core and CVS, as well as our supplements, is keeping up with these crime technologies that continue to change. So no, we didn't get directly into that. I would think that for someone, because we are asking about stalking with technology, for someone that may have experienced it, say like their offender bought their information and that's how they were finding and kind of tracking them, I would believe that they would still have a place to kind of say that they had experienced those types of behaviors, even though it's not necessarily to like that level of detail. I think we would still be able to capture it with asking about those behaviors.
And yes, I did watch that show.
We have a couple of other questions here from Emily over at Victim Service Center. Did anything surprise you from your findings? Anything you'd like service providers to be particularly aware of? Throw that to either of you.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we didn't collect data on, so we asked if folks sought services and then if they received them, and we didn't collect anything on, you know, why they didn't receive them for a particular reason. I think that would be, you know, something to think about for the future that would definitely help VSPs. You know, if or maybe, wait, did we? See, now I'm forgetting.
Yeah, we have some of that. It's not,
it's very minimal.
Yeah.
And we didn't look into it, but things like if they couldn't, you know, they couldn't get to the VSP because they didn't have transportation or childcare or things like that. You know, that could be something to look into more, and figuring out how, if it's anything the VSP can do to help them get services. First thing off the top of my head. You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for all your good questions.
Yeah.
Well, we also have a couple of questions that relate to, okay, so what can we do to help you all out? And I guess, you know, are there things that people can be providing to BJS and to you all to help refine questions, add questions, et cetera, and how would they go about doing that? There's often an open comments period when new data collection systems are coming out. A lot of people don't know about those, but it is one thing if you keep your eye on the register or other things that you can do.
Jenna, do you want to take that?
Yeah, and we have, thank you, that's a good point. And we have also started posting. So if you are Just Stats email you can sign up for on our website, we also post notices to the website and to that email when we do release kind of federal notices. So anytime one of our data collections has to go through collection, it has to go through the Office of Management and Budget, and it has to have a public comment period. We're pretty far in that process once it's gotten to that point. So Rachel kind of mentioned this, when we're redesigning or kind of redoing surveys, we might have other opportunities for like a kind of a technical review panel type situation, or involve, whether it's research or academic partners or federal partners. We've had others, and we did that with the Stalking supplement. And we're just I'll put in a very small plug for the NCVS redesign, the larger instrument redesign. We've also been working on that for years, and we've involved people in that process. In terms of the reality is that we're a small team. There's 6 of us in our victimization unit and 60 of us at the entire BJS. So we're a really small agency that does a lot of work. So we do release the public use files. The report, what you see is kind of what we're able to do. Rachel and I have had to move on to other projects. So we encourage, others in the area to take the data file and do, other things. We looked at very kind of limited stuff. So there's a lot more that people can do with the data. And as I said, we're always happy to answer questions and help through that process. But, I think there's a lot more that can be done with the data that we certainly haven't kind of dug into.
And Mr. Fernandez asks, and it kind of goes back to one of Libby's questions earlier. Can you discuss applications that allow you to find anyone with a few clicks and how that might impact victims? And are there any statistics that you're aware of available on this sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't.
Ads
I'm
that
not
say, click here to search for anybody.
Yeah. I'm not really aware of anything that's out there. And like I said, our questions in some ways have to remain a little bit general. So if someone's experiencing that, they might respond positively and say that they have experiences those behaviors in general, but we don't have that level of detail in the instrument. Yeah.
And we have another question about location and region within the US and your data. You're only presenting national level data, but does it break down by region at all so that people could really look at whether these things, and this kind of goes back, I think, almost to your dissertation, Jenna. Is it possible to break out the 5 regions or whatever in this report?
So the public use file has the census regions on it, which would be Northeast, West, Midwest, South, I believe. And then urbanicity on it as well. So urban, rural, suburban. But that's all we include on the public use files. But there are ways to access restricted use files through the Census Bureau's, Federal Statistical Research Data Centers, and you would submit an application and you could get lower level geography data, but you'd have to submit a proposal and, swear on your life that you're not gonna, tell who is in the survey and disclose information and all these kinds of things. It's quite a process. But there are ways to get it if folks are interested. And again, if you want to email us, we can send you some, web links and some details on that. But on the public files, just given disclosure reasons, we have to keep it pretty high.
I'm going to hope this is from Dr. Diaz. Maddie, are you doctor yet? Can you tell us about stalking experiences across sexual identity, race, or gender identity? And I'm going to hazard that no, identity is not part of it. Oh, come on, get finished, young lady. So
it's actually this stalking supplement when we tested. So we pre-test all our questions, the Census Bureau did. And when they pre-tested the 2016 stalking supplement, they also pre-tested gender identity and sexual orientation questions that we added to the NCVS in July 2016. Unfortunately, they're not on that file, I don't think, because it was just a half year data, right, Jenna, on the stalking file?
On the 2016, yeah, it was just a half year.
Yeah, it was
2019
a half year. So, but you could look at the core NCVS data and look at sexual orientation and gender identity on the core. But race would be on the stalking file, sex and age and some other demographic characteristics.
Can you link the core to the SVS file or no?
Mhm.
Person identifier, so you can link it.
Yep, you can link it.
We did have a thank you earlier, again, from our folks at Victim Service Center for doing the great work that you all do. Again, I can say, at least with regard to Jenna, this has been part of her life since her doctoral education here, working with people. So yeah, we got a little early introduction to some of this working with Jenna back in those days, a few years ago now. So Rachel's more disorganized. Disorganized.
Yes.
Yeah, so any other questions at this point? Again, I'm really curious. I'm always trying to get the folks out in the field to ask questions they think are important, because it really is an opportunity. We don't, having worked with these folks over the years, it's not often that we really get an opportunity for them to get in front of public groups like this and really get some direct feedback. So we'll give a few more minutes before we let them go out to lunch.
I will put a plug in for another project I'm working on, since you have a lot of folks in the field on the call today. So we have at BJS in 2017, we fielded the first national census of victim service providers. And it's really hard to believe that before that, there was not like one list of all VSPs across the country. So we worked with some contractors and developed that and administered a short survey to those folks to just get an idea of the type of organization, et cetera. And then in 2019, with a sample of the census VSPs, we fielded the national survey of victim service providers and really did a deep dive into the different kinds of victim services that are being provided across the five major types of organizations. So hospitals, governmental organizations, tribal organizations, nonprofits, and then campus organizations. So there are 2 reports on BJS's website that have details on that I could throw in the chat real quick. And we just started in January a new national census project. So we're going to redo the frame and update it, because we know that VSPs are opening all the time, closing all the time, given funding and all kinds of other things. And so we're really excited to get this kicked off for the second round. So it's very exciting work. It's a new project that I am managing, and it's different than NCVS work. So I'm excited about it, and I know how important it is to the field. So yeah, it's going to be pretty great. So.
And I'm looking forward to that first deep dive into the human trafficking service providers. So yeah.
Yeah, that too. Yes, yes. There's a lot that can be done with those data, again, that we just did, what we could at a high level, and also so we could get the data released. So let me find that website so I can share it with you.
I got it, Rachel.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
But again, let me know of any questions on that.
Yep. We're starting to get thank yous again from everybody. And yes, somebody brought up their concerns are always, what goes unreported. And I think, again, for those of us in crim CJ Soch type stuff, this so-called dark figure is one of the things that always bedevils us. And unfortunately, we can't really report on what we can't measure.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
encouraging people to report, whether it's officially or through victimization surveys and other things, is really important. So.
Yes, great to see you too, Lynn, and all of our familiar faces.
Yeah.
It's nice, you know, this is like one advantage of the pandemic is we can do these things virtually, which is so nice, and get to see you guys. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Feel free to email us if you have questions.
We don't even see the people on the other side of campus, except, and now we have downtown, so it's even worse.
Yeah.
But, all right, well, if there are no other burning questions, we're going to go ahead and say thanks to everybody for joining us today for this really important presentation. And again, by alumni, we're very happy to be able to bring back, and like I said, one of my favorite federal agencies. I've pointed out, you all do more with those 60 people than about the 500 epidemiologists at CDC studying the same disease tend to do. So, you know,
We'll let you say that.
I have in print. I have in print. Yeah, so for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we do try to do these at least monthly during the regular academic year. So we will be in the process, Ms. Finnerty and I will be in the process along with Karen and others to start setting up our fall series. And we're hoping maybe in fall we'll actually be able to do hybrid so that we can all get together again and have a presentation in a room and to people out there in the community. So if you have suggestions for us that you would like to see us cover in the area of human trafficking, and I would say I'll also go ahead and speak for Bethany and Libby and the other members of the cluster. If there are topics that you would like them to think about doing public presentations on, please do send us. You can find us on all of our websites. My email is real easy, rhpotter@cdc, or no, where am I? cf.edu. No, that'd be HPP3. But yes. So again, thank you so much to Rachel and Jenna for doing this for us today, and my gratitude to the cluster members for joining in on this one with us, so we can get an even broader reach. And like I said, thank you to all the folks from the rape prevention education and other service providers who joined us today. Really glad to have everybody. So look forward to seeing everybody back in the fall.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Yeah.